Warm greetings to everyone. I hope everyone is doing great and enjoying the virtual mode of connectivity. I am glad that everyone took out time on Sunday to become part of Sunday Samvad. For those who are attending Sunday Samvad for the first time, let me tell you that it is a vertical of MITIS where TIS alumni from diverse work areas share their experiences with students to help them develop professionally. It happens generally on Sundays. This is the seventh episode of Sunday Samvad that we're having today. The topic for today is career in public policy, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome the speaker for today, Mr. Somashekhar Gangopadhyay. So, to talk a little about him, Mr. Soma is a government affairs and strategy consultant working in the intersection of public policy, governance, transformation, and institutional reforms. He's a graduate in public policy and governance from Tata Institute and was chosen the Erasmus Plus Scholar Spring 2018 to the School of Public Affairs Sciences for Paris on behalf of the Institute. His professional engagements have primarily been with the government think tanks and planning boards at the center and states in India, transitional development organizations, and academic research establishments on matters of government outcomes, institutional reforms, regulatory governance, social policy, and cities. Currently, he is working as a district development fellow for Jalandhar district in Punjab, India. Thank you very much for joining us. And now I request the speaker's permission to start the session, and I'll begin with the questions.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. So let's start with you telling a little bit about the overview of your journey, how you channelized your aspirations, and how you engaged at the macro and micro level. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I think it would take days to answer that, but I'll try my best to be brief. First and foremost, channelizing my aspirations. Well, I mean, I did not think it through that much when I was in the university. The transition to public policy was perhaps something which was promoted by a general interest that we had in debates and Model United Nations and the natural process that you go through in school. And so that was intriguing. And public policy, when we did it in 2017, like I joined this in 2017, so it was very new then. It was a very new and emerging field, and not a lot of people not a lot of people were actually engaging with it. So it appeared to be interesting. The course instructors in TIS were very interesting in their affairs of dealing with things. Like a large part of it was an inspiration was the work of the professors there. So when I was choosing my schools between TIS and a few others, it was mostly the experiential learning, the internship, and the professors who were working there that kind of made me choose TIS over most other institutes. Um, Moving forward, I would like to, then when it came most of it, the choice regarding career after coming into TIS was broadly shaped by the research that we were doing there as a group. By and large, that research at that point of time was based in three sections. One was urbanization, the other was in regulatory governance, which I specialized in. And the third one was on social policy, or what we call, I think it used to be called as social welfare policy or social policy in those days. I'm not sure if they have changed the names now. It used to be taken by Professor Amit Upadhyay. So it was the third branch of it. And by and large, that has been the experience. Okay, so by and large, that has been the experience. Moving on from there to the professional job, mostly I got placed from the campus. So Andhra government came for an internship. We did the internship, and after we had done the internship, we chose to work there because we really liked the team which was working there. So that's how Andhra Pradesh government happened. How did I channelize my aspirations? I was very clear about the things that I wanted to do and the things that I did not want to do. So by and large, there were a lot of work which was being done at this in that point of time, which was pertaining to subjects such as gender policy, and they still do, and that's some really good work which gets done. But I have no expertise in it, and I was very clear that it was not something that was within my domain. So I never worked on those areas, even though I was thoroughly encouraged to do so by my professors, even when I was choosing my dissertation topic. I think the whole batch in regulation was doing it on DBT and the issues surrounding DBT in tribal areas of Jharkhand. I did mine in artificial intelligence regulation in healthcare. So I just knew very clearly that this is something that I was not very keen in doing, and I think that is the most important way that I was orienting my aspirations per se. That I knew what were the things that interested me, and irrespective of what the resources were available, I was always I never like second guessed on the topics that I chose to work with. Even now in a job performer, when I'm picking up work, like when I do work with projects like Beti Bachao Beti Padhao, which is predominantly a social policy focused on gender empowerment, my work within that scope remains one of creating more efficient governance and public service delivery structures. It remains in how we can have technology included in model Anganwadis to create better health outcomes for girl children, and so on and so forth. So I am not somebody who's really looking at aspects of how we can change mindsets, how intergenerational prejudices can be addressed. Those are not things that I really look at. And I'm very clear with that. Like even when I work with a project, I'm very clear with that this is something that I cannot do. So I don't do it. And I think that's very important when you want to, because the more you work in the field, the more you will gain expertise. And if you can keep it focused, if you can keep it focused to something, like if you're doing rural livelihoods and you create a focus area within rural livelihoods, that okay, I'm going to look at rural livelihood, but I'm also going to bring in a lens of sustainability to it. So unless and until rural livelihoods is dealing with sustainability, I'm not particularly going to focus on that. It's not about being rigid, but it's more about staying focused and not losing track on big picture. Because public policy, as I mean, everybody who is joining the seminar knows, public policy is a very wide field. You can work on any aspect you want, like starting from education policy, health policy, environment, to infrastructure. It's sharing economy, artificial intelligence. I mean, you can go bonkers with it. And a lot of people they don't go bonkers, but they spread themselves too thin, because they're working sometimes on social injustices, and sometimes they're working on infrastructure, and sometimes they're working on something else. So I think that is not always very helpful, because it staggers your CV in very wild ways. So one time, if your internship is in an organization of infrastructure regulation, and then you do your second internship in an organization which works with gender policy, and then ultimately your third internship would be in some sharing economy organization, like, then your CV becomes very scattered. So that is something that is not recommended from my perspective when you're orienting your aspirations. If I have answered that question, Dishti.
Yes. Okay. So moving further, can you discuss about the function of the Indian public policy sector and the involvement of government, NGOs, private firms, and think tanks, etc.? Like how particularly they function according to you. You work along this line. So what do you think about it?
Okay. So, so see the public policy. So, when in 2017, there were very few think tanks. Every day you see new think tanks come up on LinkedIn, and it's very bright. It's very emerging. You have corporations who are hiring public policy and public affairs managers. You right from your Amazon and Facebook now, almost every company wants to hire them. Things like social impact analysis, things like impact analysis in general for projects are being done by big infrastructure companies. You have things like Equita principles for world sorry, the IFC funding, the International Finance Corporation funding, they have some compliance measures which they need to meet. So these kind of work is being done every day. And new consultancies which are emerging, even business houses are now, or even big consultancy firms are now looking at government as one of their key clients. And this is a trend which happens across the board. If you look at, for instance, South Africa, you would see that when the economy was going a little, I would say there was a slowdown. I wouldn't prefer to use the word bad. When there was a slowdown, consultancies usually swing towards the government, because the government is the only institution that has the money to pay those large, fees which you are claiming at that point of time. So public affairs and public policy is becoming very lucrative, even in India right now, among consultancies. They want to consult with the government. They want to, work on initiatives like Smart Cities Mission, because they pay really, really well. The government is a very good client. Private sector is now in an economic slowdown. They usually don't have the money to pay for the typical business strategy, marketing kind of jobs. So that's a new field which is emerging out for public policy students. Of course, there's think tank, and even academic consulting is something which is emerging. A lot of universities are starting with public policy courses. So if anybody is interested in, becoming a professor in the future, or want to conduct public policy research within an academic setting, I mean, that opportunity is also opening up. So it is evolving. However, what I feel, and this is a completely personal opinion, so I would not want to put it out there as an expert advice, because I by no means am an expert. I'm just sharing, what I have experienced in a personal basis. So it should all be taken with a pinch of salt. But my experience has been that there is a lot of esoteric research on public policy which is being done, which is rooted in the idea of sociology, which is rooted in the idea of political science, which is rooted in the idea of, I mean, not even applied economics. Sometimes it's even theoretical economics that you're dealing with, that whether we should have a policy which is, more this or more that. I think such esoteric research adds little value in the professional world. Like, ideally, at the end of the day, your expertise is only valuable if it is helping other people make decisions. It can be a government actor. If your research helps a government take a decision which gives proper results, your research is valuable. That by no means it is to say that esoteric research is of no value. It is of great value. I mean, it has its own niche, but I'm talking about how the professional setting is right now. So right now, the demand of the market it would be a very appropriate phrase to use. The demand of the market is of research which can help people take decisions, and that's primarily what you will get paid for. So your entire research will have to revolve around, helping people take decisions, take action. It cannot be just a sweeping statement that, okay, marginalized communities in India are very, very, challenged. Yes, they are challenged. We all know that they are challenged, right? There's nothing new that you're saying about that. So the question is, how are you going to make those challenges go away? So if there's a solution centric approach which you take in your research, in my experience, that has given a lot of value. And even with my peers, it has given a lot of value.
Okay. So, as you're speaking a lot about how it works and how it goes, what would be some tips for the TIS context wherein students can plan their path if they want to enter this field? Or as you were saying in the first answer, that you decided how to choose, what to choose, and what to do, what not to do. So can you talk a little bit about how students can plan around it? What could be the key points which students can focus on when they study?
See, if I'm talking specifically to the context of TISS, one thing is that TIS is, a positive part of TIS and a negative part of TIS is the same point. The positive part of TIS is that you can have a lot of passionate debates. And the negative part of TIS is also that you can have a lot of passionate debates. So half of your time goes in having a lot of passionate debates, instead of, giving some really output which can change things. My question or my only suggestion to all the students would be that, professors too are your colleagues, they are your guides. Uh, so please have that kind of an idea that you might disagree with your professor. I disagree with my professor all the time. I mean, my dissertation guide and we are still in touch. We call almost every 3 days, 4 days, we are having a conversation on call and we still fight. So we still fight and we don't agree on, I think, 99% of the things. Like my dissertation guide has his views. He thinks that, I mean, in a very friendly way, I'm sure he's happy with the kind of work I'm doing, but he would at the end of the conversation say that, okay, all you do is make PPTs, this is not really research. You should look in this and you should look in that. And I would tell him that, all you do is you tell me caste and patriarchy is responsible for everything without any solution. So what is it coming? I mean, this is the kind of banter that will go back and forth. And that's a very healthy thing about this. Like you can tell your professor, uh, most of your professors, that you disagree with them and they would never penalize you for that. So you can, even in writing, I mean, when I'm writing assignments, I have disagreed with many of my professors. In fact, their published books and all I have disagreed with in my assignments. And I have never really felt that, I have been penalized for it. So I've got really good grades, even with disagreeing with my professor. So for the students, one thing that I would like to tell you is that, don't be afraid to disagree. But again, don't be disrespectful while you are disagreeing, because that becomes a very, don't disagree at a personal level. Don't disagree subjectively, disagree objectively. So if you have data to show for a fact that, what the professor is saying doesn't work, like suppose if there's a particular social policy which is being, let's say, universal basic income, it's a hypothetical example, and your professor believes very firmly that universal basic income is amazing, or free healthcare is amazing, and you have data to show that that doesn't work. So use that data and, counter that. Don't be afraid of it. Don't back down, because I mean, there's nothing. That's how academic spheres and universities and TIS work. TIS is an institution like that which would encourage you to push yourself to think and disagree. And disagreements in universities led to everything that we see around us. I mean, Galileo disagreed with his professor, and that's how we had this whole Earth revolving around the sun theory come up. And so did Einstein, so did Jung. And I'm not claiming that you would become, or I would become, a great mind if we are disagreeing with our professors. But TIS offers you that opportunity, because a lot of places don't. I mean, prior to TIS, I was in the Calcutta University, where it was mostly a one-way traffic. So if Leishman said something about Shakespeare, the professor would come to class and tell you, Leishman said this, and you note it down and you write the same thing in the examination, and you top it, right? You top the class. So that's how it is. But in TIS, you have the opportunity to actually tell the professor that, hang on a second, Leishman was ages ago. This is not how it works. Here's the data to prove otherwise. And the professor would be willing to accept it. So have that kind of thing within TIS. And the second point, which I would like to say, is that the experiential learning and your internships are going to be your biggest teachers. So when you're going for your experiential learning, when you're choosing your internship organizations, please choose them carefully. Because or immerse yourself the most you can. Like for my experiential learning, I remember for our batch, we had gone to this northern Andhra Pradesh, Parvatipuram region, which is also partly in the Red Corridor. And I thoroughly enjoyed the work there. I was working with tribal schools over there. We were interacting with kids there. I did not speak the language initially, but within 15 days, I like got a good grip of it. And there were no phone towers and stuff like that. But it's really, really interesting. And it actually teaches you how the citizens interact with government, because most of us don't interact with the government on a day-to-day basis, right? Our interaction with the government setting is restricted to maybe when we get our passports done, or sometimes when we don't visit government hospitals. Or very few of us do in the urban setting, irrespective of our socioeconomic location. Very few of us actually depend on government services. I'm not saying that you don't take government services. I'm saying you depend on government services. Like it's a dependency that you have. Like if the government service is not there, if PDS is not there, you have no other means to acquire food. So that is the kind of dependence I'm talking about. when you go for your experiential learnings, you actually see these hard points, these touch points. How does a Seva Kendra operate? And, people who are dependent on that Seva Kendra to get like a caste certificate or to get a scholarship certificate application process, without which they will not be able to have a higher education. That is very, very important to understand, like what it means in those contexts. So experiential learning and internships are very important, and disagreements of set ideas are very important, because unless you disagree, um, I mean, I'll give you one example. There was a very firm belief in TIS that sharing economy is actually not a different kind of economy. It is like ये तो होता ही था पहले, इसमें क्या है? There's nothing new about it. It's just an app. पहले ये होता था, अब app पे होता है, and all of that. But later on, we even the professors agreed, and in School of Public Policy and Governance had actually done a lot of work on sharing economy. I think the last batch did their entire dissertations on sharing economy, if I'm not wrong. That's the 2020, 2000, either 19 or 20 batch. They did their entire dissertation on sharing economy. So, that's how it is. And have that kind of an open mind. And even it goes both ways. See, it's not always that your professors are wrong. Sometimes you are wrong as well. So there have been multiple times when I have been wrong. So go back and always look at the evidence. And if you think you are wrong, just accept it that, yeah, I was wrong about this. And you also self-correct yourself. And, that's how the synthesis will happen. So thoroughly encourage you to do all three of these.
Okay. Very heavy. But okay, moving further, as you talked a lot about, how we can take things from the environment that we are set up in, and how we can learn and try to evolve ourselves, and also try to understand things. Can you tell something about the skills expected from the students or from the people who are entering into public policy?
See, as much as I have worked in public policy and my peers that I'm in touch with, I can only narrate their experience. And the experience has always been one of a solution-centric approach, right? So it's never really, no organization would really, look for a very academic kind of, at least I'm talking about professional public. I'm not talking about, research setting of an organization, but public policy consulting or rural livelihoods mission work or any kind of a field job that you do, project management. So one aspect would definitely be you have to be aware of, you have to be aware of using numbers to back your claims. That is one thing which is expected out of you. So you have to know the sources of data, like what can an NSSO be used for, what can a census be used for. If I want to look at, say, what is an NFHS indicator, can tell me about a place, what are the data sources which are district level, what are the data sources which are state level, when was the latest figures available for this and that. So the ability to use numbers to back your story is very, very important in this field. If you don't have numbers, if you are giving vague ideas that, this section, it usually does not work out very well. So a lot of people say that they are very uncomfortable with numbers. You don't need machine learning to do public policy. Okay. You don't need to be proficient in Stata or R to do public policy. You really don't need to be proficient. I mean, Excel and clarity of concepts, understanding of a mean, a standard deviation is more than enough to back your stories with numbers. So you don't need to really have a Udemy course of data science to do this, because data is questionable. I mean, I work with a lot of data. I run a data center here for COVID, and every day I'm having issues with quality control of data. So data in itself is very questionable. And most of the analysis is done by someone else. So, you can always find those analysis, but you need to know how to look at numbers, which is very important. You need to know that when should a mean be used and when should a median be used. This is very, very important, because sometimes the mean can get skewed because of heavy numbers at top. So when is the right time to use a median to back my story? What is the right way to analyze these numbers or to look at these numbers? Because the everyday Reserve Bank of India, every month, everything related to the economy comes in their report. They do the analysis for you. You just need to learn how to read that report if you're doing it about the economy. Same with NFHS. NFHS will do most of the calculation in their summary sheets. You just need to understand what indicator you need to look at. And so that's one skill. The second skill is knowledge transfer, which we as students greatly lack in. When we write even a one-page paragraph, we write it for like as if it's going to be read by the review committee of EPW, and 90% of the people cannot make out what we are trying to say. So that is a big challenge which I face with a lot of people. They complain that, oh, we wrote such a good report, but the government bureaucrat just did not give a damn about it. He just took it. He said, kya hai, ye kya hai? And that's a nice binding report which will be there. No, you have to tell it to a general audience. You have to talk to a general audience. I'll take a short example from Drishti, not to criticize her or anything, but the way she framed the question, how did you orient your aspirations? It could have been framed very differently by asking, okay, how did you plan your career? That's basically what she was trying to ask, right? But instead of asking, how did you plan your career over the phase, she asked me, how did you reorient your aspiration, which leaves a lot to ambiguity. I mean, I understood that as how to plan my career. Somebody else might have just thought of it as how did you reorient your value system to cater to the needs of the profession and so on. I mean, you can draw multiple interpretations from that, right? So this is one issue which we have. You pick up any dissertation, you pick up any report, you pick up any kind of discussion. It's always so vague, and it's good. It's important when you are in an academic setting. That's exactly what you need to do. Like when I publish papers, or when my papers go for a conference, I always write it in an academic tone. So but when I'm writing for in a professional setting, when I want to give a one pager to the secretary, or what if I want to give a one pager to the CEO of Niti Aayog, I would never use such words. I would always keep it in bullet points, simple sentences, active voice. So if you use Grammarly, for instance, there was one question I saw in the chat box which popped up, which was regarding language skills, and I just only want to say that the second thing which is expected of you is your reports should be understandable by a class 5 grad. That has to be that simple. Like whatever you are saying, if you are saying that minorities are being discriminated against, just write minorities are being discriminated against. Nothing else about center, margin, lens, that lens, nothing is required. Just write what you want to convey so that there is no ambiguity. So the first is the ability to use numbers to back your story. The second is to tell your story very clearly so that there is no ambiguity, which is knowledge transfer. Okay. And the third element which is expected of you is presentation. So presentation, not just in form of PPT, but also when you're doing reports, how are you presenting those reports? Is it interesting? Is the presentation interesting enough for people to read? Is the language interesting enough for people to read? World Bank has a free course on writing reports for World Bank, which is freely available for anybody. It's called the pyramid structure of communication. Okay. If you all want, you can just Google it. Pyramid. I think it's called the pyramid theory or pyramid structure of communication, which I always wanted to do a online course on this. It's very important. You know how you're presenting your ideas. So what is your central argument and how you're presenting it is very important, as much important as the numbers and the report which you write. So third that is expected of you is presentation. If you can do these three things well, if you can, present your arguments well, if you can tell a compelling story, which is simple to understand for everyone, and if you can back that story up with numbers, I think you're more or less set. No matter what field, what work you're doing, you're more or less set in the development sector. That has been my experience.
Okay. What do you think about the myths about public policy? And second question in continuation, what are the differences and similarities of public policy in India and different other countries?
Okay. Myths about public policy, as in what exactly do you want to know from me about that? Like, what are some of the myths that you ever heard?
For the people who want to join in, like there were many questions regarding, is it necessary that you need to have a degree in public policy to enter public policy? Is it necessary that you need to have certain amount of experience in different fields to enter public policy, or is it necessary that I need to have this amount of internships in that particular field itself where I'm applying for the public policy? So
Okay.
things like that, do you think like it's not a necessary one, but if
Hmm.
you think that there are certain things to be addressed, you can go
Hmm.
ahead. And the second would be the differences and similarities of public policy in India with other countries in relation to other countries.
Okay. So to answer the first question is you don't need a degree in public policy to do public policy. That's very clear because most of the people who do public policy in India are MBAs. And the people who are in high paid positions in public policy in India, they are MBAs, they're economists, they're law graduates. I have worked with people who are sociologists, and also, yeah, I mean, bureaucrats with degrees in literature have also worked in public policy and they have done fantastic work, most of them. So there's absolutely no need of getting a degree in public policy. Sure, it helps. It helps because you have a formal understanding of things. You are a little bit more accustomed to a lot of terms, and your as I like to say that your spider senses are attuned to public policy problems. So you can, when you see a public policy problem, you can identify that, okay, this is a design problem, this is a operational problem, this is a stakeholder mapping problem, this is a implementation issue. Of course that gets better because you're formally trained in doing that, but it's not necessary that you need a degree in public policy to do that. Okay, the second myth is that do you need to have certain internships? One question which I used to get asked a lot when I was mentoring, like when we used to have these sessions of mentoring students for who are aspiring to get into public policy, was the fact that okay, I have never done debates, I have never done MUNs. Will I be able to get into public policy? Yes, I mean, of course you can. I have no. I don't think it matters at all. You don't need a certain kind of internship. All I'm saying is that you have to be focused. So if you tell me you're passionate about the environment, that passion about the environment and the passion about policy and not activism should be visible in your CV. So if you tell me that, okay, I am very passionate about the environment, but I have done, uh, I've led movements on the ground. That's not really a policy thing, right? That's more of an activism thing. So you have a fantastic career as an environment activist, but how is that? Maybe you will become Greta Thunberg. Maybe you can win the Nobel someday, changing the environment. But how does that link to somebody paying you to do policy work in environment? So this is one thing which you need to be very sure of when you're choosing your internship roles. That if you are even in any organization, are you in a marketing role? Is your job to get more people sign up to their platform? Are you in a fundraising role in that organization? Okay, or are you in like a research and a policy role or a consulting role? What is exactly your role in that organization? Just because the organization is I mean, you can be doing PR even for a transnational development organization. That's not policy work. A lot of people ask this question, pertaining to especially jobs in UNO, that okay, it's a UN job does not necessarily mean it's a public policy job. So, but they are fantastic career. Like communication for development is a emerging field, and C4D is something that I mean, that's what they call. I guess I have no idea again, because I have never worked in that domain before. But they do a lot of. There's a lot of job there. Transnational organizations hire people, but I don't. I mean, I wouldn't know. That's not really what comes to my mind when I say public policy. So that would be something that you need to be very clear about. That is it communication work which you're doing within a development? Is it development communication work, or is it like policy making, policy implementation? Like what is the genre of the internship that you're doing? That would be very important. Okay, so and the second point is that third point, sorry, is that I have been on a semester exchange to School of Public Affairs Sciences Po, so I can only tell you about my experience in Paris. My one major difference is that, see, in India, you have very few professors who have actually who are teaching the course now. You are very lucky because you're in TIS, and in TIS we have this advantage. But there are many places, where professors who are teaching, they're fundamentally economists or sociologists or political scientists. So their experience in doing public policy is very restricted. In abroad, I found this, that most of the professors who are taking our courses, they have the experience of working in actual public policy ideas. like, they have worked with central banks there, they have worked with planning boards there, they have worked with municipal corporations there. So they understand what kind of research is needed in order to define those policy roles. Because public policy, again, my view on the matter is we are standing on the shoulders of the giants. Somebody is doing the hard work in economics, somebody is doing the hard work in sociology, somebody is doing the hard work in political science. We are simply reading those articles and then saying, okay, this is the problem, she has identified the cause of the problem, this is my existing institutional setup in the government, so let me tell you how to connect these two things, right? So we do that connecting job, which is considered to add a lot of value, because the problem gets solved and we get paid and we are all very happy about it. But that's how it is. So this is something that you need to really understand when you're doing public policy, that sometimes uh, we are standing on the shoulder. There's no denying about that. Like, I read a lot of this lot of these academic work, uh, and it's important, it's important to read that. So one difference is that professors there or courses there are designed with this solution centric approach. Like, they, from day one, they will tell you your assignment will be like a business case. I mean, it's not a business case, it's a public policy case, but it will be something like that. Like, they'll tell you that this is the problem, these are the stakeholders, this is the data, how are you going to solve this problem? So you have this very solution centric approach. You are not really burdened with things like, Acha, what is the ethical dilemma behind this decision? What is the ethics of this? Is it normatively correct or something like that? Which is, again, important nonetheless. And the focus is also there. So it's not that the focus is not there on ethics, but it's more solution centric. It's more instrumental and technocratic in nature, if I may borrow the words of my professor. That is very technocratic. In TIS, it's not so much so. It's not very technocratic. It's not very data centric per se. We are more attuned to look at the human values of things, which I feel is more important in the Indian context. Because in the Indian context, you have very weird problems in public policy. Very weird problems. I'll give you one example. Immunization in one locality did not happen because that locality belonged to people from backward caste, and the immunization person who was delivering the vaccine was from upper caste, and she just refused to go to that area. She simply refused. So no amount of machine learning in the world can solve this problem. And now you can have all your AI models, and you can have Elon Musk come to India, and then also you can't do anything about it. You can't do anything about it. So it's important to understand this thing. Like, my professor tells a story, people who are doing public policy would know this, that he was once in, and I'm borrowing his anecdote now, that in Bombay, houses were given to slum dwellers, and a lot of women had come, and they kind of did a dharna, and they said, we will only take these pakka apartments if they have no washrooms or they have common washrooms. The question was why. The answer to the question is because if they have proper washrooms, the men of the house are going to beat us and sell off these houses and take away the money. If they have common washrooms or washrooms only on the ground floor, then no middle class person will buy that house, right? So they can't sell it. So if they can't sell it, then we'll be able to live in that. So again, what machine learning are you going to use to overcome this? You can't. So the TIS approach is very important in the Indian context. So it's something that is I initially I used to hate it a lot, because I used to think कि ये क्या है, इसमें कोई data कहाँ है, where is your regression theory, where is your this thing, what are you talking? But then gradually, the more I worked in the field, the more I realized that India has a very set of very unique problems which it needs to cater to, and we need a very unique approach to public policy for that as well. So I'm also exploring that. You guys also explore, and maybe we can keep having on and off these discussions about how it works out in India, and maybe we'll have something new to offer. But that's one major difference, that their structuring of the problem is very different. That is point number one, in terms of what I had in Paris and in TIS. And the contextualization is also very different of the problems, because in India we are aware of these contexts. In abroad, there is also the problems are there. It's not that they are not aware of the problems of race or something, but again, the structuring of the problem is very different. So yeah, that's what it is by and large.
Okay, so certain questions popping up. Okay, I'll just club 2-3 questions and ask, and I'll go to the final question. Okay. So,
Okay.
what do you think that public policy is always non-field based? And what are the opportunities a starter can look forward to to polish their skills in this sector?
Okay, see, I don't think public policy non-field based तो नहीं होता है. Somebody else is doing the field work. So if I look at the NSSO data, I might not be going to the field to do the survey, but somebody else did go to the field, right? So or even with census, somebody did go to the field and collect that data. I may not have gone to the field. So field-based element is always there in public policy. What I would caution you though is that you may not be the person always going to the field. And that should also be the case. That again, that's one thing, that issue that is there. Like when we do this, when you will do your dissertation, if you are in TIS or if you're aspiring to be in TIS, you will see that there's an element which says you have to go to the field to do a survey, right? And sometimes that survey will give very weird results. Like you will sample 50 people and then you'll be very convinced that this is the problem, this is the cause of the problem. No, it's a sampling bias. It's a simple sampling bias. That's what it is. You have not gone to the, you have not found the reason of that problem. So secondary data is very, very important in public policy because we need to look at numbers. We need to look at scale in some problems. Some problems are niche where you have to, like this one particular problem I narrated about, this, village that she would not go into one particular, it's a very niche problem. It's not something that a big data set would reflect. So for that, you need a personal interaction. You have to have qualitative interviews. You have to have focus group discussions. So these things, maybe you're going to the field. So like I work in government pendency, like I work in public service delivery in my district. My district has one of the lowest pendency rates for public service delivery in India. We have been able to bring it down to 0.02%. So of all services which are offered, only 0.02% services here are pending. Rest everything is being offered on time. So sometimes I go to the Seva Kendra every day and to look at weird problems, like, okay, why is there no thermal scanning going on here? Why is no social distance being maintained? Where is the sanitizer bottle kept? There's no data where it's a field where you go, and then the next day they will manage that, okay, sir, theek hai, distance kara do, thermal scanner la do, something like that. So that's where it is. So it's a field sent. I feel it's always that you have to be in touch with the field, but you have to understand the importance of secondary data because you cannot collect that data yourself all the time. So somebody else will be collecting it, but there's always a strong field element to it. And the second question, Drishti,
different opportunities that you can look forward to for polishing your skills in public policy.
I think the same things that I said before, that, the ability to use numbers to back your story, the ability to convey your knowledge and your stories in a very simple and understandable manner, and the presentation of those things, like how the PPT, the report, however you do it, even if it's a narrative discussion like this, how you're presenting it, that would be very important. So those three skills are unnegotiable in this trade.
Okay, another question: how to channelize or negotiate the value system that you're learning in TISS or other internships for this particular field?
That depends on how deeply ingrained the value system is in yourself. So if you're very deeply ingrained with the TIS value system, you might find conflicts. You will, everybody finds conflicts when you're in. But I think, again, some of these conflicts will be resolved once you are on the other side of the table. So when I was on the other side of government, I used to feel ki kya hai, kuch nahi hai, ye to kuch nahi karte and all of that. But now that I have worked with 2 state governments and I've made reports for NITI on behalf of certain other organizations, yeah, I also feel that there are certain things which the government can do and there are certain things which the government can't do. So your value system will, I wouldn't say it will change, but you will learn to live with it. You still feel a little, weird about things. I wouldn't lie about it. So yeah, but you would learn to live with it. So that's one thing.
Okay. This is my final question from my side. I think many people are still writing questions and some of them have already been answered. So I'll go with this. What could be the challenges in public policy sector and how can people, be strong enough to face them? Or how you dealt with it? You can just give examples and just give tips to how to face these challenges that come.
See, one thing there's a big challenge in public policy sector is job uncertainty. There's no two ways about it, right? So we are, at the end of the day, if you're a business consultant, you have a lot more scope and people again who are transitioning into public policy or going out of public policy with some other degree, they have a lot of scope that they can do any other kind of work and all. So job uncertainty is something which is definitely there in the public policy sector because this is an emerging sector. So that is one challenge that you have to be very comfortable living with, that okay, I can have a contractual engagement and my contracts would get renewed every year and I'm happy with that. There's no permanency here or there anywhere. Like you can be fired at any point of time. The second thing is that the other challenge is you cannot be rigid with your skill set. So you have to always update your skills. Like when I was out of college, I did not know anything about R, but the job that I was going to do that required certain skills in R. So I had to teach myself R. Now I'm quite good at it, but this thing is something that you have to have in you, that you will be language, for instance. I did not read Punjabi at all, but I joined this job in August, and I think since August I have picked up reading Punjabi, the script, Gurumukhi script. So that's something that you have to live with, because everything in the district level below, whatever complaints come or whatever letters are written here and there, they're all in Punjabi, they're in Gurumukhi script. So, that is something that you have to be able to be a quick learner to overcome these challenges. You cannot be static. That's the second thing. The third challenge which you will face in public policy is that there is, in my experience, no mid-level jobs. So there will either be jobs which pay very little money, or there will be jobs that pay very high amount of money. Usually the mid-level jobs are not there, and a lot of things, sometimes you have to, fortunately, touch wood, neither me nor any of our batchmates that I'm in contact with or I'm in touch with would had to settle with a pay cut. TIS has been very generous in that way, with placements, with the network, with the skills that they provide us. But I have known of people who have been dropped with a degree in public policy, and that's something that is a very natural phenomena that happens with a lot of people. So again, either you switch or you are okay with this, and then you carry on with it. So these are some challenges which are there in the India sector of public policy, and I think um, the competition is going to get more tough as things progress, because more and more people are coming in. People with various degrees can come in. So yeah, that's about the challenges that are there in public policy right now. That these are things that I can think of.
So there's a question. Can we switch to public policy career at any point of time, considering that we are working as a project manager, etc., in development sector?
I think if you're working as a project manager or in a development sector, you're not making policy, but you are working in the development sector by and large. So it's an implementation aspect which you're working in. And that is I mean, you're already there. I mean, I don't see how, unless you want to get into policy making roles, yeah, you can do that. Should not be a problem.
Okay, I think time's also going up. So we will just finish with all these heavy thoughts and all the questions being answered. So thank you for the amazing session, Mr. Somashekar, and I'm sure there'll be many takeaways for people who are listening to us. I would like to thank the Mighty's team also for making this informative session a success. I also thank our audience for being patient, and we hope and we're looking forward to more participation and more listeners in our new episodes that will be coming soon. Please follow our media handles on LinkedIn and Instagram, etc. And also, you'll get information about Mighty's events at your groups or at LinkedIn and Instagram. You can also get hang of this video that we are recording right now, this Sunday Samvad, on our YouTube channel, so you can anytime go and look there. Yes, I think that's it.
I wanted to ask something. Do we have time? Okay.
Okay, last question. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. Hi, Soma. So I've already connected with you on LinkedIn. I mean, if you remember.
Yes,
I have 2-3 questions. First is, right now I'm not really sure whether I want to work in the government sector or private sector. So I want to try my internship, one in with the government sector and another with the private sector, and then I want to take a call whether I want to enter which sector. Now, is that going to be really difficult, since you already mentioned that internship which will be scattered might not be really helpful for all of us? A. B is okay. You can answer that first, and then I'll ask you the second question.
No, see, you can do it in both the sectors if you are doing it in the same thematic area. And by thematic area, I mean a broad thematic area, like not specific. Not that if you're working in, say, transport in the private sector, you will have to work in transport in the government sector as well. You work in transport in the private sector, you work in infrastructure in the government sector, that's related. So it's fine. But if you're working on something very diverse, I mean, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's just that, it's helpful to have your CV structured in a particular way. I have found that to be helpful because that adds to your kind of expertise in some ways. But a lot of people explore and they still make it. So it's not really a hard and fast rule.
We'll end it,
Right.
and you can,
Yeah.
all of you can,
Yes, so,
sir, you
yeah.
can share your email ID on the chat box so that everyone is.
So, yeah, this is regarding that only. So first of all, I'll personally also like to thank Mr. Shekhar because we are planning this session since some months, and I'm still so much glad that he has been able to take out time. We can all see that he's still in office on Sunday evening at 6 o'clock. A person is sitting at a government office, and you know how government is actually, professionals are working day and night for to secure our safety. So thanks is very less word for you, Shekhar sir. And secondly, you all can also find Mr. S. Shekhar sir was telling there have been many articles, papers he has written on even in Economic Times. If possible, we'll share the link in our YouTube description when we upload this video. And lastly, Shekhar sir, I would like to ask you, with your permission, that if some participants are interested to ask you some questions or connect with you, can we as Mighty share your email ID with them?
Yes,
fine with
email is always good, not WhatsApp though. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So
Okay.
if participants are interested to connect for professional work and guidance with Shekhar sir, they can. My contact number is available in the posters and in our channels. So they can message me. I'll send you his email ID and you can connect.
Also,
So thank you all. Thank you, Drishti. It was very great.
all the other campuses will be sharing their own contact details and email IDs, so that all the campuses have the contact details of MITIS, and you can ask us for email IDs of any of the sessions that we're having for the other links that like LinkedIn and the Instagram handles that we have. Thank you so much for being with us.